Good afternoon, Collective. It's Al, and I'm actually coming in today to kind of talk about something that we had briefly mentioned in a conversation that I had been having with Alex Ermakov on his Reality Talks, where we discussed the topic of conscious leadership. And as I was going about my business today doing something completely different, it suddenly dawned on me that we had never really addressed what conscious leadership is. And since there are a great many people who are maybe new to the idea that are either reading or looking at the work that we do onto the world, that maybe it would be a benefit for us to actually discuss what that meant. And so conscious leadership is specifically something that deals with the fact that there are people amongst our world that are taking full responsibility towards moving our species and our mental psyche as a collective into a more unified vision where we don't just represent our own personal failures or successes, or we don't just represent one demographic or one form of marginalization, but we actually represent what Maya Angelou was speaking to so candidly when she said, you may show up as one person, but you are representing 10,000. And what's happening is a lot of us are realizing, and we're being moved towards a point in our journey where we as leaders are now having to represent all of those people as opposed to just marginalizations of ourselves. And so one of the things that we really, really want to emphasize on this is that it's coming from a pure state, and it's coming from a place where we see that there is a lot greater things going on than what we experience individually every day in our lives. We see that the world is in crisis and is in transition, so a lot of tension is built into it. But we are also witnessing the birth of polarization and such de-evolution that the species isn't moving forward. In fact, some might say it's moving backwards. And so the leaders that we are speaking to are the change leaders who are making columns, writing books, talking about the evolution of the species, bringing science and faith together, bringing the different worlds to a common table so as to break bread and really get into what it is that's making the world transition so dramatically, and what it is that we can do as representatives, as delegates to those 10,000, in some cases 10 million people that we are representing. And it's something that's organically coming out through our soul, and it's projecting through the personality into the externalization for that you are all witnessing. And one of the things that I realized in thinking about this in depth was that there's a lot of challenges that come with being that type of person. You can literally be vilified for trying to bring unity into the world, especially if you deal in a realm that is specifically about spirituality, where you are moving yourself out of dogma, but still keeping the truth and value and the tradition and all of the richness that comes with those type of organizations. And you're now speaking to just bringing them towards each other, right? And so you can be incredibly vilified for that. Or we talked about briefly that the great gentleman who gave his organization to charity, and how other people seem to have an opinion about the fact that he did something good, right? That he left a legacy that far outreaches his own small time on the planet. He set an example that we can all follow. Well, if we have millions of dollars. But the point is that we're now exhibiting this behavior, and it's subject to criticism. And so instead of just being a political satire of oneself, the conscious leaders that we're speaking to are more self-aware. That's what that is. They are self-aware of the species as a whole, of their nation, not just their city, of the world, not just their nation. And as they step forward, there are a lot of people who are going to criticize them, or in some cases, especially if you're spiritual, they might call you an abomination, or they might call you the devil, or I don't know, I've been called all sorts of stuff. And all because you're talking and speaking to unity and a universal quality to our experience as part of the all. And so one of the things that I just wanted to briefly touch on that specific subject is this. Change always comes with criticism. And no matter who you are and no matter how accomplished we are in our own lives, we still have hurdles and lessons that need to be learned in order to convert those lessons into blessings. Because with each new wave of innovation and a vision that moves forward into our reality, it has to go through a phase of trial and error. And one of the things that we're going to have to really learn to do is give each other the grace to understand that though you may not always agree with the other conscious leaders that are appearing forward, that it is still the divine trying to manifest a conversation into our world. And the people that are going to be invited to these tables are representing not just themselves and their own personal idiosyncrasies and shadows, but they're going to be representing that shadow of other people. So we really need to go into this with an open heart, understanding that we're all going to make mistakes. I make mistakes. And I'll give you a perfect example of what I'm speaking to in a moment. But the point is, as these conscious leaders step forward, one of the things that I would like to see us as a collective do is endorse them in their pursuit of being of service to humanity. Instead of letting the narrative tear people down for doing the right thing, why not support them and stop paying attention to that narrative? And I'm not trying to disempower the narrative, because it still needs to exist. Everything is a yin-yang. But what I'm saying is, why not take our focus and start rewarding the people who are doing the work that we want to be doing? Because it's going to open up doors that we have yet to experience as a society. Our civilization hasn't been in a place where we've ever matured into a point where we could be the vessel of light that represents not just a small house, but that represents an entire planet. And there are so many topics that we need to discuss, ranging from global warming to the danger that we're putting our planet through and how that will end result our species, not to mention equality for women and the hypocrisy that's existing with one nation talking about the other nation not being, that's being so, crazy towards women when our own nation is taking away rights for women. So there's all this stuff going on, and the conscious leaders are now faced with a problem of trying to step forward gracefully and in a way that invites everyone to a table, allowing them still to sometimes show their anger and flash at you. And that's not an easy position to be. Politicians are used to it, but there's a lot of hypocrisy and unfortunately corruption that goes with that type of environment. And so it's almost par for the course. But for change leaders, they are not interested in compromising their integrity. And so you're finding them in different avenues that may not necessarily be where we're used to seeing leaders come from. They're incredible spiritual writers. They're incredible beings that just exist, that are creating empires that have nothing to do with what we experience leadership to be made of. And so it's becoming a little bit of a challenge to have them step forward when the world seems almost more likely to tear down the person that is bringing unity and trying to stick to dogma that is all about divisiveness. It's really hard to then bring those people towards each other. And so it's incredibly challenging for a great many of us to find each other without feeling like there might be reprimand from either the house we're coming from or from our families or from all of this stuff, forgetting that those are just little molecules within the greater organism that we're representing. But with that comes a lot of grace. You're going to have to not only be endorsing of these individuals, but you're going to have to be loving and understand that they too will make mistakes. Only it won't be because they're selling their soul to the devil. It'll be because they possibly took the wrong literature home and they found that to be their truth, 100% truth. But if their mission was to bring unity and they say the wrong thing, then especially with conscious leaders, we have to be aware and conscious of the fact that they too are vessels that are learning and expanding through our conscious realm. So the example I was going to give is that I went through a phase where I was really, and this is it might be triggering, but I'm going to take it. What happened was I was very angry at religion for a lot of the things that had happened. And what I had done is that I had projected my anger from personal experience onto the organization. And in that, I started to speak to kind of like a distaste for them. And I was speaking down to organizations that literally have kept our society going. And what I realized is that I was listening to whispers from the opposing end of it more than I was finding my own grace in the center. And what eventually happened is I had to work through that very publicly, I might add, with having to do an about face and actually just say, hey, we can't vilify the entity for what the individuals within that entity are doing, because that is in itself sacrilegious. And so I had to do a public about face. And so for those of you who are changed leaders, understand that that's par for your course. You're going to sometimes say things that are going to trigger a great many people. Some are just going to be part of the fact that you are trying to do something great for society, for humanity. But you're still having to allow for freedom of speech and of expression, because that's what we're made of. So how do you balance that out while also sometimes having to eat it on something that you mistakenly said. I have people that I greatly admire in the physical world. There are people that I support on an intellectual level that make no sense on a societal level, right? There are people who you would look at and you might know information that I don't know, but from where I'm perceiving them from the intention of being of service to humanity. And so if their intention is there, then I'm more than likely going to be graceful in how I interact with them, and I will still support people that are controversial. Having said that, with the sweets comes the sours. I've had to eat a lot of crow over the fact that I've supported some people who turned out to not be the best people. Okay, with that, we can only know what it is that we are experiencing through the interaction we have. And so as change leaders, or in this case, conscious leaders, because change leaders and conscious leaders are not, you can't interchange them easily. A change leader may be single focused and trying to affect one singular change that needs to happen. And they're very needed, by the way, but they might be all about abortion rights, or they might be all about women's rights, or they might be all about gay rights. And they have incredible service to provide the world. But a conscious leader is a person who represents not just that house, but all of the houses across, right? So it's not just abortion rights, but it's also equality for children and protection of children. It's also about protection of all these things. And they're representing that as they step forward. So in that construct, what I have found is that the learning curve is a public learning curve. And so we're going to need to be there for each other as we do these things, as we attempt to change the world for the better. We're going to have to be humble. We're going to have to be honest. We're going to have to admit defeat where there's defeat. And since it's in a public setting, the people we're speaking to are some of them still developing the strength to step forward and take the hits as they come in. Not everyone has had the life experience I have had. Not everyone understands what it is to be in a fist fight and walk out perfectly fine. Not everybody understands what it's like to be homeless. Not everybody understands what it's like to be gay without a father in the South. Not everybody understands what it's like to be Hispanic in a country that doesn't want Hispanic people here. They don't understand those things. And sometimes they attack them because it generates fear from them, right? These are hot topics that people are literally using as inflammatory devices to set bombs off throughout society. And so as a conscious leader, you have to then be the person to squash the bomb. And that's incredibly hard to do. It takes an incredible amount of integrity and grace to try and be of service in a world that is disserviceful to each other. And so when you find this passion to speak your truth and to step forward into the world as a conscious leader, the rest of us need to be there for the person and understand that what they're trying to do seems impossible right now. And though it may seem impossible to you, the other conscious leaders are doing the exact same thing in their fields. It's not coincidental that our world is so full of love right now in the midst of so much hate. There are communities banding together. Anytime there's some sort of trauma or a tower falls or whatever, the tower being a metaphor, falling, whenever that happens, we do band together for the most part. So what is it that we can do on a supportive level to show up for the people who we feel best represent our truth? And how do we then understand and give them the grace to walk that step, to walk that fiery path, knowing that they're going to trip occasionally, and that they then have to go publicly and acknowledge the fact that they were either misled or that they didn't properly read what they were reading, and all, but without being superficial about it and without being manipulative about it, right? Because conscious leaders aren't manipulative. They literally just are those vessels. And there are a great many of them who are all stepping forward. But there's a resistance to them from a narrative that doesn't want us to heal. And we see that. Sorry, I'm sitting in front of a fan. But they really don't want us to heal because how do you make more money? How do you get higher ratings? By tragedy. You get higher ratings by the misfortune of another person. You get more ratings by scaring people than you do by rewarding good behavior, because who wants to see good behavior? Well, we do. We as individuals do. But the narrative that's standing in the way between the actual change makers and conscious leaders, they don't want that, because then they lose ratings. Then people become self-reliant, and they start to actually branch out into the world in a way that is of service to others. And so the drama begins to diffuse. And so though it seems like you're going up against rock, there will eventually come a breakthrough. And it is to those individuals that we're, as the conscious leaders, looking at, because they're the ones who are representing the divine vision into the future. And it really is the future of society. How much longer are we going to be able to live in such stagnation where we're repeating the same cycles over and over again, the same wars, genocide and hatred, and this is my property, this is your property. We all live in an ecosystem that is created by the all. At best, we're renting. But the point is, how do we have these conversations and engage it if we buy into the narrative that vilifies the people who are trying to breed unity or trying to breed change for the betterment of society? And it's going to come down to you all and myself and the others to individually decide their own truth and walk that path with the people that they align with. And so, whether you are a conscious leader that is emerging out of your cocoon and having to face a little bit of a backlash, take it as training. It's par for the course. You are not politicians. You don't have to pander to anybody. In fact, that is not a conscious leader. That is a politician. But conscious leaders are aware that that dynamic exists, but they find a neutrality or a point in the middle where they don't compromise themselves, allowing their souls to be present while still dealing with the shadow nature of not just themselves but other people. And the people who then bear witness to those people who are now drawing themselves towards each other allows them to see that there is light at the end of the tunnel, that there are people brave enough to go out there and be called the devil or be called whatever it is. You're psychotic because you believe blah, blah, blah. Well, they're walking in their truths, right? And so the conscious leaders are aware that you're going to have people like that, and that we were like that at some point. Evolution doesn't happen overnight. More of us have been through hell and high water than we probably are willing to explain, but that's the difference between a conscious leader and just a leader. A conscious leader is consciously always aware, self-aware of their journey, so as to be able to interconnect with the person that they're speaking to. And they honor that soul with whatever opinion that they're having and try to meet them in the middle. But conscious leaders also have a point where they realize that it may not happen. Certain people are not going to evolve. And it's not my job or any other leader's job to make someone else evolve. But when you're talking about a we-centered reality, what we're speaking to is the evolution of consciousness, allowing people the grace and the dignity to be of service in the best way they know how, as long as they're not hurting people and as long as they're bringing unity and love and compassion and empathy. Then they are being of greater service than they could ever be in harm. But note that one of the dangers with conscious leadership is if you get stuck in your head thinking that your way is the only way, then you become an enemy to what you're trying to do. Because anytime you single focus into something thinking that you are absolutely right, then you can't evolve yourself and you get stuck. And so as conscious leaders, we're now having to acknowledge that, work through the dogma of what we think we know, allowing new information to then filter through in, empowering us to grow, right? If you live in a box where we think we know everything and that our way is the only way, then light eventually stops reaching you. You cannot exist that way. And so as we move towards this more unified collective vision, conscious leaders will become much more important in the representation of the collective as a whole. Many of you are now finding yourself at a point where you know things have to change, and you're realizing that it's just not going to happen the way that we thought it was going to happen. They're not going to change because it doesn't benefit them financially to change. It doesn't benefit them in ratings and numbers and people that vote for them. It doesn't benefit them. to bring unity because they pander to specific demographics, right? But conscious leaders are looking at the world from a different standpoint. It's like literally as though the divine has 12 eyes on the ground, 12 sets of eyes on the ground, representing different professions and different things. And what's now happening is they're starting to acknowledge each other, and they're starting to register that they may now have to start working with each other. And how do they do that within a world where they themselves are still growing? And that's what evolution is. And so for you conscious leaders, and for those witnessing the birth of the conscious leader, be aware that it's incredible. There's even more light coming at them than what celebrities would experience. Because it's not just our world focusing on them through a camera, it's the divine observing us through other people. And anything that you believe spiritually surrounds us energetically, all focused through individuals that represent demographics of millions of other people. And so we really need to be compassionate towards their paths and support each other. If you know that someone really is a good person, and even if they seem too sweet to be good, I'm going to remind you, the Buddha was incredibly sweet. Christ was incredibly loving. Mother Teresa, incredibly loving. Princess Diana, incredibly loving. All of these people were perceived as, to some degree, naive, but they weren't. They were blessed. And so conscious leaders have an aura of them that we as a species need to acknowledge and kind of help grow, because they represent ourselves. None of the people that we're speaking to didn't do the work. They did the work that you're doing right now. They just may have gotten there a little early. But it is in the light that they represent as a collective, when they hit that tree of life, that changes the all-white tree into a tree of color, with each individual bulb representing not just themselves, but 5,000, 6,000, 10,000, 20,000 people. But each little branch has each leaf, and each of us is that leaf, individual, but part of a greater whole. But these lights that are now showing, that are flashing colors, aren't flashing it just for the benefit of us. It's being witnessed by something much bigger than we are, because it's trying to manifest evolution. And evolution is hard to do. It requires a great many people having a common vision for the betterment of a species that is in turmoil. So how do we, as change makers, or as conscious leaders, or as people who are finding enlightenment, how do we then ensure that we allow people an invitation to be part of the conversations that we're having, without making them obligated to attend? Every house on the ground floor, whether it's religion or politics or whether it's schools or whatever it is, all serve a greater purpose. But how do we refine the actual purpose behind them with so much individuality corrupting each structure, right? And so how do those leaders that represent the answer to that now pool with each other and break bread in a public way that allows you as the viewer, or me as a person or as a writer, to come to that table as well and know that we are, through that vessel, being represented in the conversation, because it pulls us like moths to a flame, but not just any flame, the divine flame of life. Something that you see in the eyes of people, something that you see in the glow of that person. It's so subtle, and there's so much wonderment that's awaiting us in this new realm of unity, that I'm just speaking to the passion portion of the journey, which is, if you know that someone is actually here to do good for the world, then you don't have to do anything other than, maybe if someone says something negative about them, why don't you defend them? They're acting on behalf of something bigger than all of us. So even the littlest thing like that starts to energetically help that person rise, right? It's like when you take fire and water, you make steam, and that person kind of goes up. Because a lot of people that I'm watching are feeling targeted. And these are people who are bringing unity to the world, who are bringing solutions to the world. They may say some stupid stuff from time to time, but all of us do this. So Where's the hypocrisy coming from? Don't we want to see ourselves succeed? Because if they succeed, we succeed. And that's where the we consciousness is starting to tap into this part of our mentality. So instead of allowing yourself to be part of a narrative that tries to break that person down for being too naive or being too simplistic or trying to take advantage of that person, all you need to do is just stand by that person and just be like, hey, leave the kid alone. We speak so much to this world about anti-bullying in schools, but we bully the hell out of everybody. Online is like you're surrounded by pariahs. Pariahs. Well, pariahs too. But the truth is that, like, we preach one thing to our kids, but then we show them that we're the complete opposite. If you don't like someone's political view, you literally will go to all your friends, and not you personally, but people, will take that energy, and what they'll do is they'll bombard the person instead of helping them maybe see a different vantage point. They get so frustrated that they would rather tear down the individual, permanently building a block that cannot be broken again, instead of actually evolving. And we do that to each other. How many of us have been in a situation where we have a friend circle that we suddenly, or a family situation, where we suddenly evolve out of dogma or out of this belief that we must hate people because someone told us that we must, and how that breaks apart that nuclei. And that person then goes and does what? They make a new reality. And they evolve and they grow, and that person then is empowered. That is empowerment. When you struggle and you rise again, isn't that what you're doing? You are showing that you are the phoenix. And the people that we're speaking to in conscious leadership are those phoenixes. They're not accidental, they're purposeful. They walk with integrity, and they have a fine eye focus on the globe, on what it means to society to be loving and compassionate. There are things that I still don't even understand myself, which is, I've mentioned it before. We live in a microwave situation where people are denying global warming while we're all suffering through it. But the worst part is that though we can't do anything, we say we can't do anything about the politics to it, we're also not doing anything like actually making a law to have air conditioning in every freaking place. We can do that. We can affect that change a lot more effectively than we can completely demolish politicians. Because we still need the world of politics, because otherwise everybody just does whatever they want to do. But in theory, it's supposed to be an aspect to where the we consciousness is coming from, right? And the same thing with houses of worship. No one would ever take away houses of worship because we have to have them. That is the doorway to the all. But how do we then represent that loving energy that it was built upon in a way that brings people towards the other? If we're constantly in this state of opposition to evolution. If something is stagnant, then there's only one option. Either it completely destroys itself, or it finally eventually has to have a breakthrough. And the people that we're speaking to are the breakthrough. So, though I know that a great many of us are afraid of change, and especially afraid of things that are unknown to us, we ourselves should remember that we are unknown unto ourselves. Many of us walk in slumber, believing that we have absolutely no autonomy over our own life when we are absolutely the creators of our own destiny. But what we're seeing is an experience where when we finally do the individual breakthrough, there is literal opposition built upon that so as to keep you trapped into believing that there is no power in numbers. There's absolutely power in numbers. There's absolutely power in evolution. So I sound like all soapboxy, but I'm not. I'm just at a point where we are actually meeting each other at the table. And there are some of you who are looking at me and the others and trying to figure out whether you want to support that. Don't try to support the individual, because you're not going to ever agree with anybody. Even twins are not identical. I mean, they may look identical, but they have completely different personalities because the divine is expressing itself in a situation that's very different, right? I mean, if you think about it, it's kind of weird. The divine has two literal representations that are physically identical in the same world, but living two completely different lives. You see what I'm saying? So even they're not going to be 100% in unity all the time, and they're going to have differing opinions. So how do we honor those different opinions and still represent the global concern that is what's built upon those things? You know what I mean? Like, why are we still having conversations that don't need to be had anymore because the world literally already has decided that those things are obsolete? But there are a minority of people that are so... The reason that that's happening, they still have power, is because no one else has shown up. There has been no other conscious leadership that has formed and formally stood in front of the world together. And you're going to see that. That is where this is going. And so those people are going to need your at least support and understanding that they're trying to do well for everybody, but they're not pandering to specific demographics. So guess what happens when they represent themselves? They piss off different demographics. And it's not like political conversation back and forth. These are like global concerns. These are actual topics that affect universally every single soul on the planet. And how do we then bring about change in a way that is universally acceptable without taking the rights away from other people? The way that some people look at rights, human rights, is my rights end where your rights begin. But the same said, your rights end where my rights begin. So how do we, as a council or as a leadership or as mentors or guides or teachers, help bring people into an understanding that though they don't necessarily always agree with the other person, that their task is to find harmony in chaos? How do we do that? And the way we do that is we start speaking and we just start sharing our truth and understand that we're going to make mistakes, and so what? But we're also going to get crap for things that are just honesty. You know, I think back to all of the imaginative, innovative, powerhouse leaders and minds that have ever existed in our world that have legacies that far outlive them. And all of them share one thing in common. They broke the mold. They did something that was impossible at that time. And some of the same people that were literally crucified, vilified, and put to death are now celebrated for the same actions now through evolution. So when we start to see that we are collectively heading towards a conscious leadership emergence, then it's time for us to understand that the conscious leaders have even more pressure on them. And the only way to support ourselves is to support them in their journey. It doesn't have to be financial, like I said. If you hear someone talking crap about another human being who is literally just trying to do, whether they call it the Lord's work or whether they're trying to do God's work or all the different names that we've given it, if they're actively doing it and they're not being destructive and killing each other and spreading hatred, then why aren't we supporting that over spending all our time watching the crimes that get committed against people? We of course want to talk about that, but all of our attention is focused on fear-mongering. Why not also add something that brings harmony and that brings light to the world? And so these vessels, these chosen beings, are in a very public space. And a lot of what you don't see, I can feel energetically coming at some of them. And what it is, it's just distrust, fear, and actual hatred. Why? Why are we hating other people for bringing unity upon the world? Why are we hating people for talking about spirituality and a universality? Why are we hating scientists who are trying to get to Mars? Or why are we hating on people that have made a lot of money but they did it by working their ass off? Why are we so mad at other people when there are people who are trying to bring that into harmony? And it's just something that I was fascinated by when I was thinking about it, because I realized that there's so much conflictive data. Sorry, my hair's tickling. There's so much conflictive data of what it is to be a leader these days, that it's super important that we actually focus on what it is to be a conscious leader in whatever arena they fall in. There are incredible actors out there who are very conscious-centered. They believe in humanity and they work for humanitarian rights. Then there are businessmen who give a lot of money to charity. I'm not talking about the ones who like touch children and all that stuff, but I'm talking about the ones who actually do the work. And I'm gonna leave that there. You know I was gonna say it. But Or how about the entertainers who have been empires? They talk about the human condition in a way that meets you at your evolutionary level. Why does it matter what you think or what the drama is in their personal life? Why is that interesting to us? Is it because that we would rather be talked about negatively than to reward people for being talked about for good things? Is that a truth of ours? That it's better for us to tear down the house instead of build a new one for them? Or to help somebody survive or to rise? These are all questions that the we leadership that's emerging, for those of you who are familiar with my topics on this spiral dynamics, the turquoise leadership is rising. And it's going to be representative of not a political arena. It's not going to be representative of just a spiritual center. It's going to be an amalgamation of all of those things with people who have been individually trained by a much higher power than we to step forward and do that type of work. But as a collective, what I'm saying is, why don't we support them? If they make mistakes, okay, call them out on it, but why destroy their entire life over something that we ourselves could never withstand? Remembering that they're not just in an audience in front of you, they're in an audience of the boss. Like, they're literally representative of a higher consciousness that is emerging into our world. And we feel it. We feel it because we can't stay this hateful towards each other. We can't stay this polarized to each other. How are we ever going to do better for ourselves if we can't even come to the same table and have a conversation? We can't even debate anymore. It's as if we live in the devil's playground, surrounded by people who can't afford to lose their power by letting the rest of the world be happy. And conscious leaderships are the complete opposite. We want the world to be happy. It may seem impossible, but like I said before, most of the most powerful people that have ever existed who have left a legacy far beyond themselves in their own timeline did what? The impossible. And so what I'm saying to you all in a very long-winded way is conscious leadership isn't just a sentiment, it's a way of life. And you can see it in the person. You can see it physically, and you can see it in their energetic sphere, and you can see it in the work. It doesn't happen overnight. It literally is a path, and it is a long path. And a lot of it was through a lot of struggle. And they may now get to a point where they can be of greater service and be really, really happy in their lives. Because they represent your future. They represent the future that we're heading to if we choose that path. And these are the people that are going to be helping you reach that destination. And even more importantly, your children will live in that experience from birth. What could be more important in our world than to stop living our lives just for ourselves and to actually leave a legacy that lasts for generation upon generation upon generation? We need unity. We need growth. We need empowerment for all people. And we need to let go of this fear that by being part of a collective consciousness that we lose ourselves in it. No. You are still a divine being. You're just expressing your experience into a collective tapestry. And you have your place there. But how are you ever going to discover that if you tear down the people and the situations that are building that tapestry for you? You have your own role to play. You really do. Everyone does. So why deny us the world that we're building based on a world that's crumbling where, they're still killing each other left, right, and center. And we're all looking at them going, why are you doing that? Each of you that kills the other person is killing God. You're literally looking at each other and you're like a cell, like two cells battling each other. Or when some lower frequency comes at you and starts yelling at you about their vitriol and all of their hate and, oh, that you're this and that. Why are we as a collective then more interested in that person yelling, oh, look, he got put down, oh, blah, blah. You're celebrating the downfall of society because you're celebrating our own downfall. Okay, now I'm getting a little preachy and I don't like it. But the point is, there are people who are trying to do good. And all you really need to evolve as a species is the want to be of service, to be good. You're never going to hit it out of the park. You're always going to make mistakes. And so are these people. But we can't stay where we are. It's done. That past is gone, and we know it. The world before COVID is gone. And a lot of the hypocrisy and a lot of the things that were part of that world must go with it. But we're never going to reach the transitional phase unless we start coming together and finding a way to rebuild from the ashes of something that just wasn't working, right? And that's really scary to a lot of people. But you can't stand in your truth saying that you believe in equality while representing disequality and unharmony. You can't sit there and say that you're brave, but then not literally say your truth. And so a lot of people that are coming up in the world now are going to need your love, because the divine is still learning through us, right? And we're going to resist some of the things that we're asked to say or that we feel that we should say, because it's going to come into opposition with other people from opposing views. And so this particular group of people that I'm speaking to, this conscious leadership, is going to be the bridge that brings those worlds together. And it's my humble opinion that it is through those vessels that we will actually break the stagnation that we're all in, and that will finally reach the political realm in the way that it's meant to be reached, without trying to take away any power from them, because you can't. There's a reason why we have political structures, otherwise there's chaos. But there was already chaos. But what I'm saying is we're going to be able to bridge the worlds. All of the different houses are being brought together by these conscious leaders who are seeing that there might just be a better way to come to the table. And when that happens, and you see that happen, you will find your light, and you will travel to your destination. Secure, humble, and graceful, knowing that you are on your own path. But a lot of people right now are in a lot of toxic energy because they're feeling and they're conflicted, and it's projecting into the world. And that's not hippy-dippy. We're watching it physically happen. We have people who literally have made careers out of their entire life by just triggering other people. There are actual beings that make millions of dollars just pissing you off because it brings you down. Why aren't we then trying to help people who are doing the complete opposite and bringing you up, also receiving that type of attention? And that's a question that we as a species, as a collective consciousness, are going to have to figure out, because there are too many people still getting hurt, and there's too much violence to continue on, and we're killing the planet, we're killing ourselves, we're killing our children, we're killing everybody. And instead of being all, it can't be fixed, there are a lot of people who are going, no, it can be fixed, we just need to talk about it. So how do we shine a light on those people? It's just something to think about. Anyway, I hope you guys have a blessed day. I'm going to leave it there.